Hi everyone, welcome back to Quest for Literature. We are going to see the literary form tragic comedy. So far, we have seen what is tragedy, what is comedy, and what is the difference between tragedy and comedy, and what are the types of comedy. So, today we are going to see tragic comedy. Before getting into the video, if you are not yet subscribed to my channel, do subscribe, click on the bell icon and enable all options so that you will be notified whenever I upload a new video. From the name tragic comedy itself, we can understand that it is half tragedy and half comedy. Here you can see the harmonious mingling of tragedy and comedy. And this is distinct from tragedy, which contain the comic relief. Their comedy has a potential tragic background. In tragedy, they include comedy just to increase the tragic background in that particular play. Let's see the origin of tragic comedy. So far, we have seen a lot of literary forms like lyric, ballad, satire, epic, sonnet, ode. All those we can say it originates from Greek or Latin of classical time. But this particular thing, the tragic comedy, is unknown to the Greek. Why? Because they focus on unity of action. If there is unity of action, you cannot write a tragic comedy. Either you can write only tragedy or only comedy. So, in the work of Plautus, a Latin comic dramatist, he called his own work Amphitryo as a tragio-commedia, but not the result of deliberate artistic aim. In England, it arose, the tragicomedy arose during the reign of James I, under Italian and Spanish influences. The characteristics of English tragicomedy are mainly of two things: pastoral elements and romantic intrigue. Tragicomedy can be considered as the counterpart of the prose romance, which was popular in England and Europe at that time. At that time means at the time when tragic comedy originates. A King and No King by Beaumont and Fletcher is the best example for this. Shakespeare handled this form very magnificently, tragic comedy, maintained on the stage till 1642, that's closing till the closing of the theatre. Then after 1642, tragic comedy disappears. Tragic comic elements become inseparable to the sentimental comedy of 18th century. So that Sidney says that neither write tragedies nor write comedies. He says this about the serious place of modern times. Let's see the distinguishing features of tragic comedy. It has a purpose of its own. Then the comic relief in tragedy, which intensify the tragic effect by contrast. It does not affect the tone of the play. The example you have the porter in Macbeth, his drunken chattedness and ignorance of the murder of Duncan heightened the audience aware of the horrible deed. Then Gravedigger in Hamlet, Fool in King Lear, not meant to evoke unterrible laughter as comic character, but add their own queer fantasies to the tragic theme. Next one is the tragic background in comedy. The wrong done to the chief characters at the opening of the play. This you can see in As You Like It, Much Ado About Nothing, which intensify the comic element in the play. The complications set forth a tragic theme. The climax turn into comedy. The racing action, the growth of the play or the plot, it shows tragedy. Falling action or the plot's downward course, that it shows it's a comedy. The climax is the thing which separates tragedy from comedy. In Shakespeare's, this you can see in Shakespeare's Cymbeline, Winter's Tale, and Tempest. The characters are not in one plane; they will be in different positions. The characters undergo a transformation either naturally or forcefully before the play closes. Supernatural and pastoral elements are freely exploited in tragic comedy. The atmosphere is of fantasy, so that the alternate name for tragic comedy is dramatic romance. Let's see some of the arguments which is for and against tragic comedy. Here you can see those who always oppose this are those who judge by principles rather than perceptions. Sydney says against. First, we are going to see some of the arguments which is against tragic comedy. First one is Sydney. He called tragic comedy as a mongrel tragic comedy. Milton, in his Samson Agonist, says that to vindicate tragedy from the small esteem with other common interludes happening through the poet's error of intermixing comic stuff with with tragic and vulgar peoples. Edison says that one of the most monstrous invention that ever entered into poet's thought is tragic comedy. The unity of action, which is there as the principal character in classical tragedy, is the thing which divide drama into two watertight compartments, and none of them ever explain exactly why the mixing up of or the mixture of tragic and comic was unnatural. So that now we will be seeing some of the arguments which is for tragic comedy. First one is said by Dryden. He says that cannot but conclude to the honor of our nation that we have invented, increased, and perfected a more pleasant way of writing for the stage than was ever known to the ancients or modern of any nation, which is tragic comedy. Next one is Dr. Johnson. He questions what is there in mingled drama which impartial reason can contempt, and sees no impropriety in mixing pleasure with pain, because it's pretend only to be the mirror of life. Then the next one is Aladel Nicole. He says that the fact is that tear and laughter lies in close proximity. It is but a step from the one to the other. When in a novel of Dickens we pass from hilarious laughter to the most tearful form of the pathetic. Here, to conclude Tragi-Comedy, it says that all the art should evoke aesthetic pleasure. Tragi-Comedy is also aesthetic in its own way. The greatest masterpiece of English literature drama is of Tragi-Comedy by Shakespeare and other dramatists. That's the end of today's session. Thank you all for listening. Till the time we meet next, stay tuned to Quest for Literature, keep reading, and know the world.